Uh, start firstly by introducing myself. For those who don't know me, ironically, I'm Obakeng also, and I'll be hosting Obakeng Jona. I'm the founder and the president of Holy Trinity Mentorship Program, which is trading as Kasi Dreamers. This is a non-profit organization that was founded way back in 2013, and we've been doing career guidance and mentorship for the high schools in Mabopane area in north of Pretoria. And during the lockdown period, we have decided that we should also assist in terms of the online tutoring. We are offering online tutoring for mathematics, pure mathematics, physical science, and accounting for grade 8 up until grade 12. And in addition to that, we are hosting every Saturday, we are hosting career sessions. And this is the third career session. Now, Mr. Jonah, let me take this opportunity to welcome you into this session. Yeah, first question that I just want to ask before we can even dive into more complicated stuff. Can you please tell us about yourself? Where are you from? And who is this Obakeng Jona we have invited?
Well, like you said, it's ironic that we both happen to share a name. I'm also Obakeng. I'm from the Northwest, actually, Kimotwana. And I'm from Potchefstroom. I grew up in Potch. I went to school. I did high school in Potchefstroom High School for boys. Yeah, it was a very long time ago. I've been out of school for almost 10 years now. So I regard myself a fossil, actually. Not quite, but yeah. So I grew up in Potch, well, from nursery, primary, throughout then. And I left my hometown in 2012 when I decided to come here to study. I did chemical engineering at UCT, fun times. And well, I'm saying fun times because it was a change of both place, and it was a time where a whole lot of things happened and changed in my life. Self-discovery, me learning so much more about myself, being away from home, learning to be independent, and so on. And so I did chemical engineering. I completed my undergrad, and then I happened to go into management consulting. I did consulting 2017. It was quite interesting by then, but then I realized that it's not in line with my career aspirations. And so I decided to leave consulting. I remember when I decided to leave, many of my friends were like, dude, are you crazy? How are you quitting your job to go back, especially those who were in the same class as me during our undergraduate time in chemical engineering. And I came back here to register for my master's. I was a master's student from then after the consulting thing. And then up until now, where I'm actually busy with my PhD. Over and above my professional life in space, Obakeng is a cook. I cook for fun. I'm into art. I listen to music. And I like meeting new people. Although some people might think that I come across as unapproachable. They'd be like, why are you not smiling? Or they'd say, I don't smile in my pictures on social media. Yeah. But over and above that, yeah, I'm a man of many traits, I think. I have so many different interests, and I think that I would touch on that in the event that you ask, because it's such an open-ended question that you posed to say, tell us about yourself. But yeah, that's pretty much it about me in a nutshell.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Obakeng. Just for the benefit of those who have just joined us, may you kindly register your details on our chat box. If you are watching also via the Facebook, please register your details. Those who are working professionals, or you might even be having your own business, please write your name and your surname and the province you are from and your profession. And for the learners, please do the same. Also write your name, surname, and mention the school that you are from and the province where the school is. located. Thank you very much for just telling us about yourself. And you did indicate that you have been out of school for about 10 years. Someone might look at your face and say, no, this one is lying.
I get that a lot, I know. So I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
no
blessing.
problem. Can you just please briefly describe your schooling days? How was your schooling days and what challenges have you faced while you were studying and how did you overcome those challenges?
Okay. So like I mentioned, I went to Poch Boys High for high school. It was an interesting time. It was an all-boys school, a very traditional school, where the aim seems to be to nurture and groom us into gentlemen, identical gentlemen. And honestly speaking, I probably would regard myself as the classical nerd back in high school, where my life was centered around my academics and school. I mean, I participated in sports as well. I played hockey, I did a bit of tennis as well. And it was an interesting time. I mean, I wouldn't say academically I had any challenges during my schooling days because, yeah, as I said, that I almost worshipped my books. And if I had to go back, I'd actually tell myself that, dude, there's actually more to life than just academia and your academics. So that was an interesting time. I mean, I was raised by a single parent. I have a younger brother.
Yeah.
So that was quite interesting to see how much she actually sacrificed to put both my younger brother and I, Andy, through high school. And it was really interesting where financially it wasn't always great, but she literally put herself down and ensured that she knew that she was investing in our education. And we actually happened to have been lucky for her to be able to afford to do that for her. And we're eternally grateful. And yeah, it was an interesting time. However, there was a transition. I mean, the change from high school into university, it's always quite a step and a jump. Even more so considering that I ended up doing chemical engineering in my undergrad, where initially back in high school, I was used to being top of my grade, things were great, where schoolwork seemed relatively easy. And then suddenly you get to varsity, and there was a big step and a big change in terms of the pace and the intellectual capacity that the work required from me. So not only was it a thing of me having to adapt in the change of environment, but the learning a living space had also transitioned in me moving from Poch to Cape Town. And it was quite interesting where, like I said initially, you thought that, okay, this person was able to do anything academically, top of your grade, and then you put in a class where the average person only probably has 5 distinctions, so everyone was like really smart and bright, and you literally just like a drop in an ocean, a drop of water in an ocean.
That's correct.
So it was quite interesting where you put in a space of like-minded people, everyone is bright, and I think it was also there and then where the change, I was made to realize that there's actually more to life than just my books and just my schoolwork. Whereas people, I believe that we need to be holistic and also nurture and pay focus to different areas within our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, why did you choose to be an engineer, and also why chemical engineering instead of other fields?
You know, back in high school, actually, I thought that I was going to go into theoretical physics. I wanted to become either a quantum physicist or an astrophysicist because I was always into space science and physics. And to me, the idea of using mathematical models to describe our universe or to describe things that we cannot see, I thought that that was really cool. And I'm realizing that I had a misconception, especially in my early high school days, of what engineers do or what engineering entailed. In my head, when I was younger, if you had to say to me mechanical engineer, I probably thought, oh, it's probably a mechanic or someone who is always hands-on and would fix cars or would work with gears and spanners and get their hands dirty with oil. So to me, that wasn't appealing, considering that I would have preferred to actually be a person who would sit down and write and derive equations and so forth. So I think I had a misconception of what engineering is in its entirety. And I don't know when the transition actually happened, but I had a cousin who was doing electrical engineering back then when I was still in high school. And she made me aware of how, in as much as I'm strong with my mathematics, my physical sciences and maths, and I wanted to venture into a career along those lines, she made me realize that to become an astrophysicist or a quantum physicist would require so much studying versus with engineering, where you would only do your undergrad and then you can go straight into professional career, versus where when you're trying to become a researcher in theoretical physics or other sciences, typically you'd have to study up until PhD. Ironically, here I am. But so it was for her, she was making me realize that there's a time aspect involved in trying to become what I want to, as well as opportunities available for I mean, comparatively speaking, there's more bursary opportunities for students who want to go into engineering as opposed to a student who would want to become, let's say, a theoretical physicist. So she made me aware of that. And I had been against the idea, like I said, only purely because I had a misconception of what engineering was about. But when I got to around grade 11 or early matric, that's when I started to be like, okay, perhaps let me try to hear or find out what all this engineering stuff is about. And when I learned about the different disciplines within engineering, I came across chemical engineering. You know how back then we were young, we'd sit in the bathroom and then there'd be a toothpaste or hair shampoo, and then you'd see like a list of chemicals that are written that there's what and what. And a question I asked myself was, who actually sits down and decides what to put in these things and how much of each component to put? So that's what I initially thought chemical engineers do. I thought that chemical engineers would sit down and say, okay, we're trying to make toothpaste. And to make toothpaste, you're going to put an egg, and then you're going to add Oros, and then you're going to add mayonnaise. So that was my initial understanding of what it was. Only to find out that no, it's actually process engineering. And I might actually elaborate further on that to distinguish between chemical engineering and chemists. So it's actually probably the task of a chemist who would actually decide on what to include in a product. But to me, it appealed to me that it's people who work with stuff that they can't see. That's very, very fascinating for me, that we're able to try to physically to develop models or things that we cannot see by using mathematical models and applying physical sciences to describe things that actually come to life. So that was my initial understanding then of what chemical engineers do. And as I grew into matric, I actually had then realized that it's actually process engineering. I was then exposed to Sasol, the products that we use every day, literally mining, Sasol, the pharmaceutical space, that you will require a chemical engineer to be able to convert a raw material product into something that is usable, literally from our clothes to the fuel that we use. And to me, the versatility is what is also still appealing to me, that you're given this skill set, it's literally like a toolbox, and with it, you're able to apply it to many things and to make things happen in life and to actually advance the livelihood of humanity.
Nice. Someone might ask you, you were speaking about process engineering, the chemicals and all that. But now, what's the difference between the chemistry and chemical engineering?
Okay. So a person who studies chemistry becomes a chemist, as you might know, and a person who does chemical engineering becomes a chemical engineer. The distinguishing factor is primarily the design aspect. The engineer designs, the scientist is not trained to design. A chemist is a scientist, and they do not design. I always make an example of, let's say, HIV or some other disease.
Yes.
I'm trying my best not to talk about COVID right now, because yeah. But there would be a disease that exists. Let's say it's HIV in this regard. You'd have molecular biologists who identify the disease, and then they'd study it. They'd say it's a virus, or in the case of HIV, it would be a virus. They'd study how it interacts with the body and so forth. And you'd have medicinal chemists who try to formulate chemicals or compounds in the lab. In the lab, who would synthesize to try to combat this virus alongside molecular and cell biologists. And let's say once they've discovered that, okay, the cure for HIV is 2 teaspoons of Oros and vinegar, for example.
Yes.
Having to move that mixture or this combination of chemicals from that to the marketplace, you will require a chemical engineer. The chemist only has knowledge of how the molecules will interact at bench scale and to be able to have chemical reactions occurring at bench scale, in other words, at very small volumes. And once you then want to move from the lab to the marketplace, you will need a chemical engineer. Chemical engineer would be the person who would then be working alongside chemists. The chemists will tell them that this is the reaction that needs to happen, 2 teaspoons of Oros and vinegar. And in us trying to formulate and mass produce this, you would need to design a chemical process. So now, as opposed to having the mixture happen in a mug, you will have to use a much bigger reactor. A reactor, a chemical or bioreactor, is like a huge vessel in which the chemical reaction will take place. So now, instead of using a spoon, you will need to use huge impalers within the actual reactor, and you need to ensure that the mixing is done effectively, the heat transfer is done effectively, the mass transfer is done effectively. So chemical engineers study those kind of things to be able to mass produce and to convert raw materials to chemicals of higher value. And that's what distinguishes chemical engineers from chemists, where we're not too concerned about the molecular interactions. Yes, it does matter and it will impact the reaction that takes place. But for us, it's more the design of the process as to how do we then convert this, especially from one scale and scaling it up. And the process of scaling up itself has its own challenges. Like I said, it's one thing to make tea in a mug, but if you're asked to make tea for 1,000 people, how do you then approach that problem? And to ensure that each and every single cup of tea is the same in terms of sweetness, in terms of the amount of milk that you need, the temperature of the tea, and so on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I get an understanding now. Ironically, also, I did my undergrad. I majored with chemistry and applied mathematics, but
Really?
I left chemistry. Yeah, I left chemistry at undergrad and continued with applied mathematics for
Oh,
postgraduate.
that's cool. Did you like chemistry? How did you find organic synthesis?
There is a reason why I left chemistry at undergrad and not further studies.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember my chemistry days.
Yeah. I can. Why have you decided? Most of the people, especially in engineering, most people they just prefer to get their degrees and go to the industry,
Sure.
and then. But you decided to follow a different route. You then went to do your masters and then PhD. Why did you decide to study and up until that level
So actually, my master's was upgraded to PhD. That's why.
to the PhD? Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, but I chose to. The reason is that I intend to become a researcher. I don't see myself as an engineer in industry or PPE.
We no longer hear you, Obakeng.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Yeah. So I'm saying the ultimate goal for me is to become a researcher, an established researcher, and I don't honestly see myself on a plant as an engineer, because typically what happens, especially in the South African context, is that there would be processes that already exist. If I had to take, let's say, the making of Oros, as I said, I've been making the whole Oros analogy because it's the most relatable thing to the lay person.
Yes.
They already have a blueprint recipe to say that to make Oros, you will need these chemicals operate in these containers operating at those temperatures, and you mix it and then do that. And once you're employed in an Oros factory as an engineer, as a chemical engineer, you'll be a process engineer, and your task will be to ensure that the process operates optimally and all is in check. You literally oversee a process that already exists. Especially in South Africa, there's very little room for design and innovating processes from scratch. Because if you look at the South African industry, most of the big companies are from the Western countries, where they would establish their own processes and products, And once they bring them onto Africa, the process has already been designed. And all that needs to happen here is implementation, and the engineers ensure that whatever has been designed operates optimally, and then the process, the product that is meant to be produced is according to specs. And for me, that takes away the core part of being an engineer, where my intention would be to design and to innovate from scratch, as opposed to overseeing a process that already exists. Over and above that, like I had mentioned before in the poster as it's written, I intend to apply my skills in the biopharmaceutical and pharmaceutical space, right? And with an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering only, what would then happen is you will only become a process engineer, as I had explained. They'd say, okay, we're trying to make painkiller, or we're trying to make vaccines for COVID-19. And the vaccine has already been developed by a molecular and cell biologist. You, as an engineer, there's a process that's already designed. You need to ensure that it operates optimally and that the production is made according to specifications. Whereas for me, I want to be part of the people who are behind the scenes. Before it's moved from the lab to the marketplace, I want to be part of the team that is involved in the product design. Because chemical engineers at undergraduate level are taught process design. You're taught to design a process. It's almost as though you're given that, okay, there's a chemical reaction to make, or else you need A plus B to form C, and then you design the chemical process. However, before you even, the people, there's a team before the process is designed. There's also a team that decides what product is required. And then in the lab, there's also trial and error in trying to develop a product that doesn't exist yet. So I want to be part of that process as well. And that's where you will require a person who has trained beyond the undergraduate degree to be in the research and development space. I mean, I always regard myself to be twofold, to be partly scientist, partly engineer. Because apart from the design aspect of it, I also want to be involved in the product discovery, product design, before we say that this is how we're going to take it to the marketplace.
Nice.
So that's why, to me, it's so appealing to want to study further and to be trained well enough to a point where I'm able to do beyond the process design.
Wow. Okay. Thanks a lot. You seem to be passionate about your research, and normally when I do follow you on social media, where you be in a lab working so hard and all that.
Yeah.
Can you just briefly tell us more about your research in the layman's terms, where even the learners will be able to understand what is it that you are doing in your PhD research? And you also touched on an important point in terms of that your master's was upgraded to a PhD. A learner from high school might not understand exactly what do you mean when you say that the master's is being upgraded to the PhD. If maybe you can also maybe elaborate on that aspect, and then afterwards just tell us briefly about your research.
Sure. So how the upgrade actually works is that, in my regard, I registered in 2018 as a master's student, and I was in the lab. I was doing my research in the lab on the same project. And towards the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, I was in talks where my supervisor had approached me, and she mentioned to me that, so they look at three things. They look at the potential of the project to be converted to a PhD. So the difference between the master's and the PhD is that the master's is you demonstrate that you can master the scientific method, that you can approach a problem, and then you apply the principles of the scientific method, and you master them. The doctorate degree, however, is that you need to demonstrate that you're able to conduct research independently. So, and it also needs to be novel. You need to be contributing your knowledge to the body of work within your specific space or discipline. And in my case, as I had said, I started my master's in 2018. And based on, like I said, it's dependent on the potential of the project, the potential of the student, where they see that based on the progress that you've made, have you demonstrated enough that you are at a level that is regarded to be fit to be changed to a doctorate degree as opposed to having a master's. So I feel like as a supervisor as well, sometimes you can tell when a student has already mastered their work or the level that they're being competent at and their research progress, if they're able to demonstrate that they are beyond the level that they're currently at, sometimes a student can be recommended for an upgrade. So in my case, it was that I had made sufficient research progress, and they also felt as though I bear enough potential, enough research potential to be upgraded from a master's candidate to a PhD candidate, as well as my project having the potential to contribute new knowledge to the body of work. So I tend to joke and say to people, it's almost like skipping grades. Technically, you could say that it's that, especially if the learner has demonstrated that they've done enough work. So it needs to be substantiated that they're at a level where that it warrants them to be moved from one level to the other based on how much they've done and if they'd be able to do that. So although the project might have the potential to be upgraded, is the learner ready to be placed at that level beyond where they currently are? And that's what happened to me. So with my project focuses on developing probiotics for bacterial vaginosis. So to start off, I'm sure that not everyone knows what a probiotic is.
Yeah.
Typically speaking, I would regard a probiotic to almost be the opposite of an antibiotic. So when one is sick with a bacterial infection or disease, what would then happen is sometimes health professionals would put the person, they would then administer antibiotics or they would prescribe antibiotics. So an analogy is how it would work. It would be like if you would be in a mall and you are the bad guy and the cops are after you. It wouldn't make sense for the cops to chuck a bomb into the mall because everyone else, even the innocent people, would end up dying. And that's the approach. That's the approach of an antibiotic, where it wipes off everything, regardless of the good bacteria. It wipes off both the good and the bad bacteria. So a probiotic does the opposite to that. In essence, if, for example, I am vegetarian and everyone else is a meat eater, the approach of a probiotic would be that in the food that's available, it takes away all the vegetarian stuff and only puts meat. So in so doing, I end up starving and then I die. So it's killing selectively, or it's promoting the growth of particular bacteria or microorganisms. And the actual probiotic itself is made up of the microorganisms that you want to promote its growth. So it's usually yeasts or bacteria. So the probiotic that I'm trying to develop is for a condition called bacterial vaginosis. So bacterial vaginosis is a condition that affects women of childbearing age. So that's like from their early adolescent stage up until maybe mid-50s or so. So what then happens is that there's bacteria everywhere. I mean, I'm sure most people know that. There's bacteria on your face, in your mouth, in your eyes. And people tend to think that all bacteria is bad, and that's not true. There's bad bacteria and then there's good bacteria. You actually have so much bacteria in your body that the makeup of the bacteria that is on and in your body is regarded to be an organ in its own right. It contributes to your well-being, it contributes to your health and immunity and so on. So sometimes in the vagina, the number of bad bacteria outnumbers the number of good bacteria. And that's when the case is regarded as bacterial vaginosis. The pH in the vagina increases, there's inflammation, it secretes more fluid than normal, there's a bad odor, and sometimes there might be no symptoms whatsoever, as I had highlighted now. And in the case of bacterial vaginosis, she becomes 3 times more prone to contracting HIV. It might lead to labor complications where there's preterm labor or spontaneous abortions. And like I said, one of the most important points was the HIV acquisition as well as other STIs. So once the female has bacterial vaginosis, she becomes the chances of her contracting those STIs and STDs increased by 3-fold. And currently they're using antibiotics. And like I said, there's a problem with antibiotics because antibiotics tend to wipe off everything. And in as much as it might be like, okay, cool, in administering antibiotics, you're able to wipe off everything. The problem is that in 50% of the cases, after 6 months, the condition relapses. So the female will be put under antibiotic treatment, and after 6 months, it relapses again. So the research that we're actually conducting is answering the question, which alternative methods can we then employ to ensure that there isn't a relapse, that the microorganisms don't build resistance towards the actual biopharmaceutical that we will then develop for the treatment of this. So it's in the bioprocessing space where we incorporate aspects of biochemistry, chemistry, chemical engineering, as well as other sciences, molecular and cell biology, to try to develop this product to alleviate the burden of bacterial vaginosis. So that's the focus of my PhD.
Okay. Okay. Well, one thing I like about this session is that we are learning each and every time we're having a session like this. We learn something new, and I really appreciate. Even from my side, I'm learning a lot. And last week we had a medical practitioner who was also telling us more about the type of work that she does, and I really appreciate it. Now I have something, and I guess even the learners will also agree with me that they are learning something from these sessions. And the other thing that I just want to find out, if you were given a chance to choose another career, would you still choose to be a researcher slash engineer?
Oh no, definitely I would. I'd do it, I'd pick it over and over and over again 100 times.
Yeah.
I love what I do. I'm happy with the space that I'm in. And part of me is actually not beyond the research aspect. Part of me is actually considering to go into academia actually, because I tutor and interacting with younger undergraduate students. They ask questions that I used to have when I was their age or when I was at their level. So it's quite interesting to want to teach as well. But if I was then forced to change right now, or maybe back then, I probably still want to go into physics.
Okay.
I think so. I'd probably want to still do theoretical physics because I really, really like physics and maths. Yeah. Or maybe I'll become a chef.
That's another passion.
Yes, I could cook. I could become a chef as well.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, for those maybe who have joined us later, please register your details on the chat box by mentioning your name and your surname, the province that you are from, and the school that you are attending. If you are not a student, you can also mention your profession. I do see here that we have Tabile Mahlangu from Gauteng, from Holy Trinity Secondary. Yushay Kailas from KwaZulu-Natal, Woodlands Secondary. Kilebogile Mawela from Bukamoso Secondary in Tembisa. Kabelo Masinya Academy for Christian Education in Northwest Province. And Bunolo Ski also she's working from as a robotics process engineer in the Western Cape. Kamukalo Masenya from Highford, Mpumalanga. I'm not sure, Obakeng, if you are reading, you are listening to the provinces. I've already mentioned Gauteng, we have KZN, we have Northwest, we have Western Cape, we have Mpumalanga, and there are more who are also still. Oh, we also have Free State. We have our tutor who's Kidumete Mampani, who's in the Free State at the moment. And I'll just quickly go to Facebook. We have Nonofo Jieko, who's from Komoto High School from Northern Cape. And we also have Apelele Ntsikeleko Koyo, who's a second year student at UCT, originally from Eastern Cape. We have Matutu Masitla Mafa, who's an attorney and also one of our executives of Kasi Dreamers. And I will keep on mentioning some of you. I see that most of you are now registering your names. I really appreciate it. We do have quite a vast audience here. I think in terms of the province coverage, if I'm not wrong, I've counted 6, if not 7 provinces. Now we continue with our sessions. The learners, you can start preparing some of the questions that you want to ask our guest speaker. At a later stage, I will give you an opportunity to ask questions if you do have any questions. But someone might want to know, in terms, especially those learners who are currently in high school, what is it that you have learned at high school that helped you to be able to survive while you are doing your undergraduate studies before we can even go further to your masters and PhD. But the one thing that you have learned from your high school, and then that lesson you took it to your undergraduate studies.
Honestly speaking, briefly and simply put, is that hard work.
Come closer, we're still losing you. Yes,
Maybe I think there's a problem with my mic. Can you hear me now? Is it clear?
we can hear you now. Probably maybe if you can go closer to the mic, then it will be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, no, I was about to say, simply put, I would say that hard work is never in vain. It really is never in vain. And always keep your eyes on the prize, regardless of the circumstances. I mean, it might be easier said than done. I know that it seems easier said than done, but it's always really important to know why you're doing something and what you're going to do.
We are losing you again in terms of the sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Is it better? No.
it's better now. Yeah.
I had to mute and then unmute. Okay, but yes, I was saying hard work is never in vain, honestly. So one needs to be disciplined and you need to know why you're doing something. You've been put in school and in high school, and you need to realize that you're not doing it for your parents or your guardians or your grandparents or whoever it is that is putting you through school and paying for your fees. You need to understand that for them, they're seeing it as an investment, but for yourself, you're doing yourself a favor because no one is responsible for your life but yourself. That you don't want to one day be 50 or 40 and laying in bed and having a life that's filled with regrets and only think that had you put in that extra hour of studying every day, that you would probably been in a different place or a better position in life right now. So it's very important to be disciplined and to know also who you are. I
Yeah.
think self-awareness is something that's very important. We live in a society that expects everyone to become a doctor and an engineer or a lawyer and so forth. And I'm actually quite against that because we're all gifted differently. I
Yeah.
might be strong academically and then I ended up being an engineer, but the next person to me might be a great sports person. And by
Yes.
them being a great sports person, it should mean that, no, I'm not saying that they should neglect their academics, but they should be disciplined in order to achieve the best that they can. But being self-aware means that you then nurture your strengths and then you're able to venture more into what it is that you've been called for. Yes, sometimes it might be that you wish or want to become an astronaut or a doctor or whatever it might be, and it might not necessarily be aligned with your strengths, honestly. It takes you then having to go back to the blackboard and realizing what it is that you can do best. And once you've identified that, I would say invest your time and your strength in ensuring that you maximize your strengths. So it's quite important to also be disciplined in that regard. And one thing that's also really toxic that I'm realizing tends to happen is people comparing themselves to each other. I mean, just because you and I are siblings and we grew up in the same household, it doesn't mean that if I went into this career path, you can't be a great sports person. I could have ended up in engineering, but you could have ended up being the greatest golfer. And that in itself is also just as much as an achievement. So people should actually stop comparing themselves to each other and focus on themselves. You are your biggest competitor because always try to achieve and do better than you did the last time. Looking at the next person, honestly, is not going to help. Identify your strengths and nurture those.
That's so true. You nailed it. I don't want to even add more. I totally agree with what you have just said. And can you please take us through to your undergraduate studies now? How was it, and what were the expectations from the lecturers?
Phew, dark times. Undergraduate, like I said, there was a big jump from matric to undergraduate, from matric to the undergraduate learning space, where the pace was much quicker. The level of thinking that was required of us was much higher, where you come here thinking that you understand and you master mathematics and physics and chemistry, only to realize that what you were taught in high school was just a glimpse of reality. I mean, you did science as well, and you know very well what I'm talking about. So it was difficult in that at first one would struggle to find a healthy work-life balance, and you end up losing yourself because people would always say, "Oh, you study chemical engineering, do you even have a life?" Honestly speaking, there were times where I did not have a life. It was only perhaps in late third year into fourth year that things started to ease down, and then I had found my rhythm. But I felt as though I had a very poor work to life balance. It was only now I'm a postgraduate that I had. Well, I feel like I have it under control right now. And the expectations from the lecturers, jeepers, we were worked like horses in undergraduate. And I mean, there's quite a number of friends of mine whom I started with in first year who ended up not being able to make it to the finish line because of the expectations of the program as well as the institution, where one is always expected to be at their peak. That they always say, yeah, chemical engineering, yeah. I mean, for them, I don't think that they perpetuate or try to foster the culture of not having a work-life balance. But the reality is that the kind of work that we were taught, you'd end up having things like, I mean, I remember there was a point where I had 7 or 8 different courses or modules in a semester. And the pace was very quick. Where in the lecture, it would literally just be highlights of what you're supposed to be learning, but the great detail depended on you after the lecture and class, having to sit down and you would be learning. Every day from 8 to 5, it would be lectures and tutorials and class tests. So it was quite hectic, and it took a lot of discipline to be able to make it out alive. It was, and that in itself also contributed to character, where I thought that in high school I was disciplined only to come and begin undergrad here, and then you're bashed, your ego is broken down. Like I said, that you were initially dark scholar, top of the school, to be in a class filled with everyone, literally everyone is the dark scholar, and you actually realize that there is so much more beyond the academic aspect of it, and I appreciate it as much as back then it was rough and we all felt like, oh my goodness, Cayman just killing us. But it makes me who I am right now. It contributed to my work ethic, my thinking capacity, and just the way I approach life and solve problems to this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, nice. And then which skills would you say that these are the skills that I developed while I was in undergrad and
Beyond the technical skills that come with engineering, I would say I developed time management skills. I was actually quite involved in student leadership as well. So transferable skills that would be picked up from outside of the classroom, like as a student leader, things like being able to chair meetings and to lead a team of other student leaders. I picked that up. Engaging with people who are from different backgrounds as myself, because it's a very international university, UCT, where we come across people of different cultures, and learning to accept and realize that there'll always be people who view the world differently from you, that there'll never be a point where people sing the same song and are on the same page with different things or particular things, and that your reality might be very different from the next person's, but it doesn't make you more correct than the next person. That was one beautiful thing that I also learned here. And I think in learning independently and be not accepting not just taking in what I'm told. I learned to interrogate what I'm told. I mean, I could tell you that it's water in here. It does look like water. It probably smells like water, but is it really water?
Yes.
Back in high school, you were told that to calculate the area of a circle, it's pi r squared, without really questioning why is it that we're using pi? Why is it the radius that's used? And you come here and you're told to think about things from first principles, because education is man-made first and foremost. And there were pioneers who sat down and said that we're trying to teach these things, and this is the approach that we're trying to think. And then the approach that they took, was it biased? In what context were those things set? Was it very westernized? Is it very Afrocentric? Is it Eurocentric? And why is it that we're taught those kind of things? So I was taught one valuable lesson that I had learned was to be able to think independently and to interrogate anything and everything that I'm told, not just taking something or to say it's true because the textbook says that. I mean, textbooks can be incorrect because they're man-made after all. Yeah.
That's good. That's great. Uh, the the other thing that I just want to find out, in terms of the learners that are here now, what is it? If maybe we're telling you that, again, tomorrow you're going back to your grade 11 class, or you're going back to do grade 10. What do you do now? What is it that you were going to do if you are that high school learner now?
I think in high school, one didn't see, or maybe I'm speaking from a position where I was privileged enough that I wasn't struggling a lot with my schoolwork. But one valuable thing that high school students don't seem to maximize is the power of collaboration and working together with friends and teaching each other the actual school content. In as much as you have a teacher who would say, okay, this is how you would solve this quadratic equation, they would explain it in one way. But if there's a learner in the class who seems to understand it, you as a person who might be struggling should not be ashamed or afraid to approach that learner to find a different perspective of learning that thing. And even those learners who actually understand, they should be open to teaching other kids or people. I mean, now there's WhatsApp groups. I mean, back in high school, I didn't have WhatsApp when I was in grade 11. There wasn't WhatsApp. They were in such platforms. So because now you can form WhatsApp groups, do that with your friends. Talk to each other about homework problems. I'm not saying copy each other's homework problems. And even the kids who end up copying each other's homework problems, that's literally photocopying. But in the process of copying someone's homework, are you truly understanding what it is or the approach that the person took? Because in the event that you have to write a test or an exam, it will be a blank page and the question will come, and you need to fully understand how to approach and to solve the question, the problem. So collaboration. I think I would probably want to collaborate more and help other students who had struggled back then, or ask questions in the event that I did not understand. And probably also mentorship, the importance of mentors. Like, I feel like it's really important, especially at like grade 11, 10, even at grade 9. I feel like it's never too early to actually get a mentor. Because at grade 9, end of grade 9, you're expected to select subjects that will be aligned to your career path and the programs that you can apply to university for. So mentorship, collaborating, and not being afraid to ask questions both to your peers and to your teachers. If you're an introvert and the shy type, like I was back in high school, perhaps stay after class. At the end of the class and everyone leaves to go to the next period, you can approach the teacher then if you're afraid to raise your hand during the class session. So you should never allow yourself to go through a day without understanding the course content, and consult other material, like above and beyond what's given in class. I mean, most people have smartphones and smart devices now. Google the problem. Google additional explanations. There's YouTube videos. We live in a world that is filled and we're swimming in resources, and technology also comes to help. Yeah.
Nice. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate for those who have registered their details. And I just want to repeat to those who have not yet registered their details, please do so by registering on the comment box. I do acknowledge the Jackson Richuyo, who owns a laundromat in Johannesburg, Gauteng, and Kukula Baloyi, who's working as an investment analyst and also a postgraduate student at UCT. We also have Itumelen Shabangu, who's a civil engineer specializing in bridge design in Pretoria. And we have Keleso Maepe, who's doing PhD in clinical pharmacology from UCT. And we have Kumo Masenya from Bumalanga in Highfield Secondary. I'll just quickly just check from the Facebook. We also Okay, this one is just a compliment. Someone who's complimenting, complimenting one of the tutors who are inviting her. He says that she's a graduate, but she's learning so much today. It feels like she's still in grade 6. So as I said earlier, we are learning. I'm also learning on my side, and we will get to that. The other thing that I just want to find out in terms of what are the possible funding opportunities for learners who wants to be chemical engineers. And even there's still someone who also have already asked that question, who's funding a PhD, and then how difficult is it to get funding for the PhD? But I want that to start first at the undergrad level because
Yeah.
the possible funding opportunities that are there.
Yes. So there's quite a number of engineering firms that offer scholarships and bursaries. I know there's actually a website that's filled with bursaries. I think I'll share it with you after the
Yeah,
session. We might
no
post it on
problem.
the Facebook site. But I'm aware big engineering companies, your ISCOM, CESO, Anglo American, Anglo Gold, um, the list is actually, it's not even exhaustive. I mean, physically, physically it is exhaustive because there's only so many companies. But there's quite a number of places and spaces that offer those. And I know UCT as well is able to offer top performing learners entrance scholarships, but that usually doesn't cover everything else. But for engineering, it would be great to try to secure a bursary with an engineering firm, especially if you intend to practice as an engineer in industry, because what then happens is that you're able to secure a job as an engineer in training after your undergrad. Yes. So for my PhD, so the Department of Chemical Engineering here at UCT, I have a scholarship through them where partially they get their funding from the National Research Foundation, NRF. And it's almost as though they would have different sources. They get funding from industry, NRF as well. And they would have like a big pot of funding. And from there, they're able to allocate and allot the money to different students who are awarded scholarships and bursaries. So that's the case for me as well. It's through the Department of Chemical Engineering.
Are you guys under a research chair? Is it the research chair?
Yeah, well, we have yes, the Sachi chair. We have the
Okay,
Sachi chair.
all right.
Yeah, we have quite a number of Sachi chairs actually.
Yeah, all right. No problem. I'm aware of the statistics. I used to work closely with the different, with NRF previously when I was working for a higher education institution. So now, in terms of the learners who are here, we are nearing towards the end, and I will highly encourage the learners to type in their questions if they do have any questions for our guest speaker, so that we can later on read those questions to our guest speaker. And what coming back to you, what's one thing that you can, some of the learners who are attending here, they're from the rural areas, some they are in the townships, so and then others, especially around this time, they've lost hope because they've not been to school since March and all that.
Yes.
What is the way, what are the words of encouragement you have for them?
Well, one thing that we should all realize and recognize is that this pandemic and lockdown is not only affecting individuals, it's us as a collective, that everyone is all in it. So don't be despondent or feel as though that your world is crumbling and that you're the only person who's not going to school, because it's happening to everyone else. And one thing that's also really important, and that I've also quite learned, is making the most of one's situation. That in as much as you might not be going to school right now, but you probably have material. Hopefully you have textbooks. I know that it's not everyone who actually is able to have school textbooks, and I'm speaking from a high school context, that there are students who actually come from less privileged backgrounds and they share textbooks in a classroom, I can imagine. So use the internet as well. There's nothing that's more fulfilling, at least in my opinion, than independent learning. Not everyone is self-motivated and self-driven, but I would encourage people to try to, even if it's through a smartphone, Google every other time. I know that there are issues surrounding data. Accessibility is a huge problem, especially in the times of the lockdown. That not everyone has the privilege to say that they have Wi-Fi or that they have data to connect to the internet. But reach out to friends and talk to people whom you trust, especially if you're not feeling well. Very many people are actually prone to having mental health issues during this time, because people are isolated, people are alone. Work and life schedules it's now all over the place. Things are scattered through and through. So it's quite important to be able to have a support system and friends. If you cannot from your immediate family, talk to your friends, talk to your school friends or high school friends who are in the same boat as you. And in so doing, you'll actually realize that you're not alone in this. And people need to also encourage each other. And I also tend to avail myself on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram. I try to also educate. I'm sure you've seen that, like you said, that I'd be in the lab sometimes. I'd run quizzes on my Instagram stories where I'd ask people questions. And yeah, I think that's the most that I can say now. That it's important to realize that everyone is impacted and you shouldn't feel like you're alone. I'm not saying that I'm belittling how people feel. And I know that some people are more privileged than others. And so the impact of the lockdown and the pandemic hits harder for the less privileged than it does for other people who have, let's say, the internet and they can pass time and learn independently online. But make the most of that and connect to your friends, your school peers, your classmates who are in the exact same position as you are. Because in so doing, you're actually almost able to share your struggle and the burden on your shoulder is made lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's great. And you mentioned social media. For those who wants to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Well, on Twitter, it's still my name, Obakeng_Jona, and then Instagram as well is the same, Obakeng_Jona. So I use my name, my usual name and surname as my handles there.
Again, thanks a lot for this opportunity, for agreeing to speak to us. We really appreciate it. We have learned a lot from this, and I hope that even the learners have gained some knowledge that they didn't know before. And we have a message from one of our tutors. Unfortunately, she had to leave earlier on, but I'll just read it out loud for you so that everyone can be able to hear. It says, "Thank you, Obakeng, for this informative session. I have learned a lot as a woman and mainly as a tutor. I'm definitely sure our learners have learned a lot and are inspired. From Kasi Dreamers, we wish you nothing but the best, and we are looking forward to see you wearing that red gown. Halala, rise, black child."
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me here. It's honestly an honor and a privilege for me to be able to share my journey, my experiences, especially to the Kasi child, considering that I myself grew up in a township. And so it's great. And I'm glad that I'm able to demonstrate and reach out to the black child who is able to look at me and see someone who looks like themselves and to realize that it's actually possible
That's
to
correct.
be.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure. Let me quickly check if there are any comments from a Facebook account. We don't have any at the moment. And from Zoom also, the learners have not yet asked sent any questions. I'm going to pick one who will be thanking the speaker on our behalf. Yushay, if you can prepare yourself, you're going to be the one thanking our speaker on behalf of all the learners. And we also have a comment from Mr. Kagiso Mangope, who says that it's informative, articulate, and very relatable. Thank you for this opportunity.
It's my pleasure, honestly.
Yushay, I like to give you the opportunity to thank our speaker.
Okay. Mr. Obakeng Jona, this was a very informative session. It has taught me quite a bit as a teenager. Thank you very much, and hope you have a good life.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure, honestly. It brings me joy.
It's a nice hat.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yushay. Really appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. From my side, Obakeng, thanks once more. I really appreciate this, and we wish you nothing but the best. We'll also be waiting to see you now changing your title from Mr. to Doctor. We are looking forward to it.
Yes.
And we will invite you now for another session after that. Yeah.
With a change in title.
Yeah. Okay, no, thanks a lot. Everyone who have tuned in up until this, I'm aware that most of the people have logged out. Probably maybe it might be issues of data and other commitments, but we really appreciate you for your time. And we wish you nothing but the best. Next week, we will be hosting Pilot, who's going to be with us, Pilot with Tumelo Katisi. She will be sharing also her journey. Most of our guests, they started from humble beginnings. They also tell you that they've also coming from the townships, and it was challenging as you also experiencing the same challenges, but they managed to make it in life. So we really encourage the learners that they should come back next week and tune in as we are continuing with our career session. From me, thank you very much to all of you. We will be ending this session now. And once more, thank you very much again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.